Thank you. We now come to the Opposition Day motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition on children not in school, National Register and support. I think it's probably a good idea if I share some of my thinking about this afternoon, because obviously we have two debates that there would have been obviously a little more time for. So I'm imagining that the opening speeches will be about 15 minutes. I will each, of course, I will have to put a time limit on if we're going to get the speeches in for the next debate as well. And at the moment, I will imagine that the backbench speeches will probably be about 5 minutes on a time limit. I hope that's helpful, and if anybody feels that they can't squeeze enough in that time, please let me know. Bridget Phillipson to move, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the motion in my name and in the name of the Leader of the Opposition, and I draw the House's attention to my interests in the register. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we seek permission of this House to make time in the weeks ahead to pass legislation to protect the interests of children who are not in school, to use a day of parliamentary time to put their concerns first, to put them at the heart of our work, to make real for one day the promise that only a Labour government can bring, the promise of a Britain where children come first. Because it is a national scandal that every day, every week, so many children are not in school. Absence from school is not simply a problem in itself. It is a symptom of deeper problems and a cause of further problems. And while the package of measures that should tackle those problems, which under a Labour government will tackle those problems, must be detailed and comprehensive, a key part of it is knowing where children who are not in school are instead. And of course, before I go further, I should emphasise that some parents choose lawfully and properly to educate their children at home. Many of them do so very well, very effectively and to a very high standard. Those children are not the focus of our concern today. Their parents do not have anything to fear from a register of children not in school. The register of the sort that I and the Leader of the Opposition seek the permission of this House to consider in a bill next month. And I want to emphasise that until very recently, support for the register of children not in school was a cross-party endeavour, one in which politicians across this House agreed. It was, of course, an element of the schools bill which the government introduced in the other place in the summer of 2022. The register of children not in school was one element of that bill which received wide support, not least among professionals in children's services. But the schools bill disappeared from Parliament, and of course I pay particular tribute to the Honourable Lady, the member for Meon Valley, who has pressed this cause so hard among members of her own party, including by bringing her own bill here since in that time. And again, her bill has wide support outside of this House too. There were many supportive comments offered to the Honourable Lady in the legislation that she was proposing. But the words of Julie McCulloch, the Director of Policy for the Association of School and College Leaders, does bear repetition. The Government really should make parliamentary time available to ensure that this simple and necessary measure passes into law. Frankly, the public will find it astonishing that there is no such register already. It is exactly for that reason that we seek today parliamentary time to put it into law as soon as possible. But of course, the Honourable Lady and voices outside this House are not alone in recognising the crucial importance of the register. There were many distinguished supporters for that bill, on the government benches included. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I have informed all of the honourable members I intend to mention that I intend to reference them in this debate as a good courtesy to them. The members from Morley and Outwood, Eddisbury and Stoke-on-Trent, who all went on to serve as education ministers. The member for Worcester, not merely a former education minister, but today chair of the Select Committee. And the member for South Staffordshire, one of the current Secretary of State's ample collection of predecessors. Support for legislation around children not in school is of course not limited to supporters of that bill, none of whom were ministers at the time. The member for Colchester was clear almost 2 years ago, being as he was then a minister in the Department for Education, that he and his colleagues intend to legislate to ensure we have a register for children not in school. And as he rightly observed, in respect of parents home educating their children, this is something no parent who is doing the right thing should be concerned about. The member for Littlehampton and Bognor Regis was admirably honest when still a minister last summer. We think a register of children not in school is important. We agree. The member for East Hampshire, now back as a minister, spoke when launching a consultation of the government needing a register of children not in school to prevent vulnerable young people from vanishing under the radar. To prevent vulnerable children from vanishing under the radar. I could not put it better myself. Does he still not hold to those words? And if so, when are they going to get on with it? The Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel de Souza, has repeatedly called for a national register too. And of course we know, from her words in this place last month, that the current Secretary of State herself takes the view that, and I quote, "It is my priority and I hope to legislate on it in the very short term." But sadly, she isn't here today to lend her support to this motion. And as is sadly the case for the Secretary of State, she has been unable to convince her own Prime Minister. Because the Prime Minister, as he never hesitates to make clear, is never very interested in the welfare of other people's children. And this failure by the government to address the most serious and urgent barrier to learning in our schools, that children are not there, it exemplifies a broader failing and tells a wider story. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to her and I congratulate her for exposing this scandal that's affecting children across our country. In my borough, it's gone up significantly since 2016-17. Does she agree with me, given what's happened during the pandemic and the failure of the government to meet the requirement of additional funding, a shortfall of 10 billion, that young people are suffering, and it's vital that there's mental health support along with the register to ensure that young people are supported back to school, where mental health provides a significant barrier to them returning to school?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. She makes an important point about the wider pressures that children and young people are facing at the moment. I will come on to precisely that point. But it's why I was so delighted that Sir Kevin Collins, the former government catch-up commissioner, backed Labour's long-term plan for making sure we do address those longer-term challenges coming out of the pandemic. And I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Frome for giving way. Congratulate her on raising this really, really important issue. Analysis by Labour estimates that more than 1,300 pupils in Wirral will miss half their lessons by 2026. That's an absolutely staggering figure. The NEU has pointed out that the scale of the impact of poverty on persistent absence cannot be underestimated. I'm sure my honourable friend would agree with me that this government has failed massively on child poverty and that they should listen to Labour, cut the cost of school uniforms and provide free breakfast clubs in every primary school.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for her support. Those are precisely the kinds of measures that a Labour government will be taking right now to back families, to cut child poverty and make sure that children are set up to succeed. And very finally, before I make some progress.
One of the reasons why children might drop out of the school system, as you say, go under the radar, is because they've had a parent sentenced to imprisonment. And if you talk to the the charity Children Heard and Seen, they will tell you that we know exactly how many Labradors are in this country. We have no idea how many children are affected by parental imprisonment, but we know that it's a six-figure sum. Does she agree with me that we could use this register to try to get some data so that these children get the help that they need, whether it's mental or physical support?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and for all of the campaigning work she does in this very important area, supporting families and children where imprisonment is a factor in their lives, where a parent is spending time in prison or through the criminal justice system. I think she raises a really important area, one that I'll come on to further on in the debate, around the need to get a better sense of all of the information around a child so that we can better support all children and families. Very finally, then I must make some progress.
I'm very grateful for Honourable Levy giving way, and it's really important she's brought this critical issue to this House today. There are many groups of young children, as we've heard, who are not at school for many reasons. One group that's particularly close to my heart is that of young carers. And she will know, I'm sure, from all the evidence analysis that on average, young carers miss 27 days a year of school. This shows there's an absolute urgent need to have a national carers strategy with a focus on young carers. Does she agree, and is she committing her party to push that forward in government?
I agree we absolutely must do more to support young carers, and I give the undertaking that a Labour government will make sure that young carers' voices, their needs, their rights and the support that should be made available to them is taken very seriously. Madam Deputy Speaker, members on both sides of this House will be familiar with the view widely held on the Conservative benches that whatever other damage they might have done to our country, whether it be laughing in the face of voters waiting year after year for NHS treatment, as the Prime Minister did last week, or the sewage that fills our rivers and seas, or the growing crisis this party has created in provision for children with special educational needs and disabilities, separate from all of that, many of them still hold that at least the education children receive in our country is something the Conservative Party has not yet damaged beyond repair. The trouble with this belief is that if it were ever true, today it is no longer. At the end of last year, the OECD's Programme for International Student Assessment 2022 results came out. Now, members opposite have for many years taken a keen interest in these results, which I should say at the outset are based on such a small sample in England that they may not be altogether robust, a point to which I intend to return. But close observers will have noticed that over a number of years, the intellectual effort by the Conservative Party and its apologists has moved from explaining to concealing what they show, from regarding them as a spur to action to taking them as an excuse for complacency. And we are today in a debate on an education matter, so I hope that members across the House and you, Madam Deputy Speaker, will forgive me if I briefly adopt a didactic tone. The PISA score for each country shows how well that country is doing at educating its children across reading, maths and science. The PISA rankings are about how well the children in that country are doing relative to children in other countries. Rather obviously, that ranking is affected not merely by how well children do in other countries, but how many other countries are involved. So to go up the rankings or down the rankings need be no measure of changing outcomes for children in England, nor of any success for this government. It is therefore the scores, not the rankings, which are the proper focus of government attention. It is not enough that our children are doing better than children elsewhere if they are doing worse than their older siblings. No comfort that their reading is better in another country if it is worse than their brothers and sisters. Education is not a contest between nations, but a shared endeavour in every country and across our world to give them the very best start, not for some of our children, but for all of our children. And what the PISA results showed was that standards in England's schools are going backwards, backwards in science, in reading and in maths. They may not be going backwards as fast as elsewhere, but the pace of failure ought not to be a source of pride. 14 years into a Conservative government, and they focus carefully on the rankings, not the scores. Their proudest claim is that other children, for whom they are not responsible, are getting an even worse education overseas. It beggars belief. And it is no good blaming all of this on the pandemic. The pandemic was worldwide, but not every country has gone backwards. And that slow failure is not a story of poor teaching, of staff not pulling their weight, of leaders not rising to the challenges they face. It is structural. It reflects choices made in Downing Street. It reflects the priorities of the party opposite. Tax breaks for private schools, not standards for state schools. Smaller bills for the super rich, not better starts for children. Because the one area in which this government excels is the creation and maintenance of fresh barriers to learning. Schools may crumble, indeed. Despite the Secretary of State's well-publicised view of the quality of her own work, the BBC Panorama programme last night showed so powerfully that schools do crumble. But nothing seems to stop ministers putting fresh barriers in the way of our children getting the education they deserve. I'll just have to make a bit more progress. Barriers because children are neither at school nor in home education. Barriers because children aren't ready that day or that year. Barriers because they haven't slept, they can't concentrate, don't succeed when they should, aren't learning when they ought. Barriers because children simply aren't well. Barriers that speak to that wider failure, the piling of expectations on schools alone, that schools alone can never meet. Because child poverty's effects don't end as the classroom door closes. That good night's sleep, the space to do your homework, the quiet, undisturbed time at home, missing from far too many of our children's lives. The PISA results that I mentioned earlier are based on such a small sample in England that they may not be altogether robust. And that points indirectly to the problems we face. The problem with which the next Labour government will and must contend, because this government has not, is not and will not. Teaching children who come to school doesn't help those who don't. Supporting children we know about won't bring in the ones we don't. And the results for children who are there aren't meaningful for the children who aren't. True for PISA, true for GCSEs and true for A-levels too. Labour's belief is simple. Excellence is for everyone, not just for those who are in school every day, but for those who aren't. High and rising standards must be in every school, in every classroom and for every child. And today, all too clearly, they are not. Across the autumn and spring terms last year, over 1.5 million children were persistently absent from school. That is, roughly speaking, 1 in 5 children. More than double the number who were absent during the same terms 5 years ago. If that rise goes on, then the number of children persistently absent will rise to more than 2 million in 2025-26. 1 in 4 children missing at least a day each fortnight. It is a disaster, and the government is doing as close as it can to nothing at all. And let me quote to this House the words of a head teacher in a state secondary school in the North East earlier this month. Today, an unremarkable Wednesday in the second week back after a 2-week holiday. 10% of our students are absent from school. 17% of Year 11 students, those in the most important examination year of their lives, are absent. We've become used to these statistics, and sadly, these patterns of absence are considered normal in our schools. Indeed, our attendance is higher than national and local averages. Now, ministers will doubtless tell me they're proud of their attendance hubs, that those 10 councils they are set to deliver attendance mentoring in. The Secretary of State might as well be proud of the water pistol she's bringing to a wildfire. School leaders know this is a disaster. They can see the catastrophe unfolding around them. Just finally.
Thank you. My friend's giving a truly excellent speech. She just earlier talked about barriers. Isn't one of the big barriers the fact that if you have got a neurodivergent condition, you cannot get diagnosis. Even if you get a diagnosis, you can then not get any HCP or a SEND plan, and it's creating huge barriers for children with neurodiversity such as autism to be able to access school in a safe environment.
My honourable friend is absolutely right about the challenges we see right across our SEND system, a system that the Secretary of State herself has described as lose, lose, lose. Madam Deputy Speaker, school leaders know this is a disaster. Yet earlier this month, the Department updated us all on the work of the Workforce Reduction Task Force. It is not the work of teachers, as they clarify, to be investigating a pupil's absence. Teachers may do it. It is vital work. It needs doing. But it also depends on our amazing support staff too. Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour's plan to tackle the attendance crisis starts with our smallest children. A childcare system modernised from the end of parental leave to the end of primary school. High quality early education. A focus on life chances for children, not just on work choices for parents. High and rising standards right from the start, with early language interventions to identify and remove barriers to learning early. A determination to reform the SEND system, to put money behind children, not lawyers, to tackle issues before they hold children back, with a new focus on primary numeracy, so children love maths at 6, never mind at 16. Excellence for everyone, not for some of our children, but for all of our children. Free breakfast clubs in every primary school, because it's about the club, not just the breakfast. Every day, every child, every life and every start. 6,500 new qualified teachers, a new national voice for our support staff. Ofsted reformed and improved, an end to the high-stakes, low-information culture with annual checks for attendance, safeguarding and off-rolling. Mental health counsellors in our secondary schools and new community hubs outside them. Joining up the information we have on our children so every child can be supported, between schools, between services, every issue caught, shared and addressed. And the cause for which we ask for time today, a law to register and count the children out of school. Labour is clear how we will fund that package, fund the change we need. We will end the tax breaks for private schools, we will end the tax breaks for the mega-rich. We will invest in what we believe most, our children, their futures, in excellence for everyone, in high and rising standards, in a Britain where background is no barrier to opportunity. And the legislation we will bring next month, with this House's permission, if today's motion is agreed, will be simple. It will be part 3 of the government's own schools bill from 2022, which provides for a register of children not in school. Nothing that members opposite would not have been prepared to vote for had it been tabled by their own ministers. So there can be no reason, no excuse for Conservative members who care about this issue not to support the motion today and the bill next month. They can choose their party or our children. I commend this motion to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, as I said, I will need to put a time limit on if we're going to get any kind of parity with the next debate as well. That will be 5 minutes, and I'll make sure it is put up on the board there so people are aware of it. Minister Damian Hinds.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. And look, I welcome warmly the opposition's focus today on the vital subject of school attendance. It's a big issue and one we want everyone to be talking about, because being in school really matters for children. It matters for their education, it matters for their development, for being with their friends, and for all else that school brings. As our campaign says, moments matter, attendance counts. Now, of course, everyone will be off school at some point through illness, and sadly there are some who do have to be off for extended, sometimes very extended periods. But we want children to be in school absolutely as much as possible and cut out avoidable absence. Now, I'm quite sure that the Honourable Lady wants to join me in celebrating the success in cutting absence since 2010, prior to the pandemic. Attendance levels improved significantly, with absence falling from 6% 2010 to 4.8%, representing 15 million more days in school. And persistent absence, that was 16% in 2010, came down by almost a third by 2015 and stayed around that level up till the pandemic. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, increases in absence since the pandemic is something that, of course, many education systems are dealing with. That is true in jurisdictions far beyond these shores. It is also true in all of England, Scotland and Labour-run Wales, where, by the way, the increase in absence is from a considerably higher starting point to a considerably higher current point than in England. So I do welcome her tabling this subject. The actual motion, though, I'm afraid suggests the subject is perhaps not one the opposition are taking properly seriously. It starts saying the government is not tackling persistent absence. Now, set aside for a moment that is plainly nonsense, as I shall come to shortly. Not at the moment. There then follows the most colossal conflation, a massive non sequitur about a register of children not in school because they are home educated. Now, obviously, Mr. Deputy Speaker, absent and not in school do sound pretty similar. But if she really thinks that the issue around absence is all around school, all around children en masse being home educated, then she has failed to grasp this issue. Now, I would simply point the Honourable Lady who speaks for the opposition to the motion as it is printed here, which clearly connects the two with nothing more than a semi-colon. Now, we do think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that local authority registers are important. They would help improve oversight of those children who are not on school rolls. But it would not directly address the larger group of children who are on a school roll but have been persistently absent from it. Now, before we go on, I'm going to ask the Honourable Gentleman from Sheffield to forgive me for a moment. Before we go on, a short word about children in home education. This is often done very well by parents who make huge sacrifices for their children, often in particularly difficult circumstances, and I pay tribute to those parents. It is also, let us be clear, a right for parents to do this, and that is a right I defend. But we do think it is important for local authorities to have a register, because we know that not all children who are not enrolled at school are in receipt of a suitable education at home. We also think it important that parents who are homeschooling should be able to get support and source it from their local authority. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, she should know that this is government policy, since as she says, it appeared in the schools bill. She may or may not have spotted that the department has just in the last few days completed a consultation on elective home education to inform new guidance. I know she has spotted that there's a private member's bill in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Meon Valley, which comes to this House on the 15th of March. And both the Secretary of State and I look forward to working with my honourable friend as she looks to progress her bill through this House. In the meantime, the Government continues to work with local authorities to improve their existing non-statutory registers. Do you know what? I'm going to go to my friend, the honourable gentleman at the back, just because he's had to go 3 times. The honourable gentleman from Sheffield.
Well, I thank the Minister for giving way. According to the 2021 census, there are over 197,000 young carers under the age of 18, and that's recognised to be an underestimate. So when 85% of head teachers told the school census that they had no young carers in their school, it only illustrated how they are unrecognised within the system. Now, evidence to the Young Carers APPG inquiry said they have double the persistent absence rate of their peers at 41.6%. But young carers are not recognised in the DfE guidance on working together to improve school attendance. So when this debate is finished, will he go away and review that guidance? And will he consider giving all schools the requirement to have a lead for young carers in the way that they do for SEN to make sure they are no longer unrecognised within our system?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, he is right to, and it came up, of course, earlier as well, he is right to identify the number of young carers that we have, of course, growing up in our country and going through our school system and the particular needs that they have, and that is directly relevant here in the case of absence. And we are working to improve understanding of where there are young carers, including through, as he says, through the school census and also through the guidance that we issue. And keeping children safe in education, as he will know, is the main guidance that is issued on that subject to schools, and it does require designated safeguarding leads to be aware of the needs of young carers. But it is something that goes broader than that within school communities and trying to understand. And of course, dedicated professionals working in our school system seek to do exactly that. I will.
So generous. In my constituency, families struggle. The cost of living crisis is ever present, and the housing crisis forces many families to move from house to house to house to house. Children end up quite a long way from school because parents, understandably, want to keep the child with some level of stability and keep them in school where they know their friends and their teachers. And to be honest, my schools are brilliant and the teachers are really committed. But surely that we need a recognition that cuts to council budgets combined with massive increases of need, which they are at the moment, is a contributing factor to children being out of school. Does he accept this?
Could I just say to the opposition that, one, interventions are interventions, not speeches. And second, it's your own time you're taking. You'll lose time on the second debate. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Look, of course, I readily acknowledge that cost of living pressures, inflationary pressures have been difficult for families in many ways. It's also true that the single most important thing to do to underpin family budgets is employment, and we are benefiting from still very high rates of employment in this country. We're benefiting also from proportions of people who are in work on low pay having come down significantly as a result of the national living wage. So yes, there is much more to do, but there is also a great deal happening. Mr Deputy Speaker, I should make some progress. I was saying in the meantime, and we're back now on the Children Not in School register. In the meantime, the government continues to work with local authorities to improve non-statutory registers. And I mentioned already the consultation on revised guidance on elective home education, and through termly data collection, we're also increasing the accuracy of registers, improving the understanding of this cohort of children. But true accuracy will only be gained with mandatory registers stipulating the data to be recorded and with an accompanying duty on parents to inform local authorities when they are home educating. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we often say that reading is the most fundamental thing in education because if you can't read, you can't access the curriculum and nothing else in school really works. But there is one thing that's even more fundamental than reading, and that is attendance, because whatever other great things our school teachers do, they can only benefit children who are there to benefit from them. Now, I am pleased that we have started to see some progress in this area. There were 380,000 fewer pupils persistently absent or not attending in 2022-23 than the previous year. I'm not quite sure how the Honourable Lady does her extrapolation to her 1 in 4, but this is not what it's not what the data series say. On Thursday, we'll see the first data published for persistent absence this academic year, and we shall see what it says, but I hope it will show some further improvement. In any event, Mr Deputy Speaker, we certainly know there is further to go. Now, our comprehensive attendance strategy includes a number of different elements. There are clearer expectations of the whole system, including requiring schools to have an attendance policy, appoint an attendance champion, and for local authorities and schools to agree individual plans for at-risk children. And my right honourable friend, right honourable lady, the member for Chelmsford, I think was to be leading a debate in Westminster Hall, will be leading a debate in Westminster Hall very soon in connection with and in support of her presentation bill on making such obligations statutory. On data, and the Honourable Lady spoke of data, our attendance data tool now provides near real-time information, not once a year, to allow earlier intervention and avoid absence becoming entrenched. We already have 88% of schools taking part in our world-leading daily registers data pilot, and we want that to be 100% by September. We have I'm going to ask you to forgive me in the interests of time. We have targeted support where schools with strong attendance performance support others that need help, and we're expanding that so almost 2,000 schools will benefit. Our mentoring pilot, which I think the Honourable Lady inadvertently referred to, our mentoring pilot is delivering one-to-one support with persistently and severely absent children. It's currently in Middlesbrough, Knowsley, Doncaster, Stoke and Salford, and will be extended to the 10 new areas, a total of 10,000 children later this year. System leadership is incredibly important. That's why we have the Attendance Action Alliance, which brings together leaders not only from the world of education, but from children's social care, from health and from allied services, all working together to address what the wider barriers and enablers may be in attendance. Now, of course, as I said earlier, and let's be very clear, some children do need to be off school some of the time, and that has always been the case. But there has been some change in attitude since COVID, with a greater propensity to keep a child at home with minor illness like a cough or cold in some cases. And we need to recalibrate back, at least back to where we were pre-COVID. And that's why we've launched the national campaign Moments Matter, Attendance Counts, to re-emphasise the importance of every day in school, not only for learning, but for well-being, for experiences and friendships too. Alongside these, we've made attendance a key theme of school and children's services reforms. We've provided additional funding for recovery, including for tutoring and direct funding to schools. To help families, we've committed an additional sum, £200 million, to scale up the Supporting Families programme, which of course has a specific requirement on school attendance. We are spending on the National School Breakfast programme to provide around 350,000 breakfasts on a school day, and over 2,500 schools targeted to the most disadvantaged areas. And I would say to the Honourable Lady that one should look at secondary schools as well as primary schools and being able to target, because persistent absence is, of course, can be particularly concentrated in the secondary age group. And of course, there are more children now in receipt of free school meals, considerably more than there were last time a Labour government was in office. And this is despite the fact, to the Honourable Lady, despite the fact that there are 600,000 fewer children living in workless households, and that thanks to the national living wage, the proportion of people who are in work but in low pay has halved. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, mental health barriers are also a very important part of this, and that's why we're working with NHS England to increase the number of mental health support teams. They already cover 47% of pupils in secondary schools, and their coverage will increase to at least 50% across all phases by March of next year. I'm pleased to report that in the latest data, while still a lot to do, there is some cause for cautious optimism. Overall attendance last term was 93.2%, up from 92.5% in autumn 22-23. And this means pupils in England, on average, attending the equivalent of around a day and a half more across an academic year than they did the previous year. And so, as I say, while there's still a long way to go, this does represent progress. To conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, for the vast majority of children, school, of course, continues to be the best place for their education, and it has never been more important to be at school. England's primary school children are now the best readers in the Western world. Yeah, yeah. And at secondary, we've made considerable progress. The Honourable Lady said some interesting things about the main international study of attainment at secondary. It's not the only one, but the main one done by in the PISA study, in which England has materially moved up the rankings. I have to say, having previously come down the rankings, of course, before 2010. And the Honourable Lady says that in the end it isn't the rankings that matter, it's the score, and she's of course right. But it is true, and I'm surprised that she doesn't know this. She said not every country has been badly affected by COVID in education. I have to tell her, COVID has had a real knock on education across most of the world. And I beg your pardon? Okay. It has took a great knock across much of the world, and much of the world is now engaged in recovery programmes to make up that ground. But what the PISA results showed was that by comparison with other countries, the knock that had been sustained in this country was less than in very many other countries. The other thing that the PISA results highlighted about education in England was it identifies this country as being one of a relatively small set of what it calls equitable systems. So in other words, as well as having strong performance that relative to other countries, that performance is well spread out. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, there have always been some children educated at home, and I repeat my tribute of earlier to parents who, in so many cases, give up so much to do this and do it so well. But COVID created a big increase on top of what was already growth in the numbers, and it's important that we understand this. The wider issue is that the legacy of the pandemic has also meant that school absence levels are too high. We remain committed to working with pupils, with parents, with teachers, with local authorities, with health and other partners to tackle these issues through our support-first approach, building on the strengths of the current system and the success that was achieved by teachers and leaders in our schools prior to the pandemic. Being in school, as I say, has never been more valuable for pupils, with standards continuing to rise, and I'm hugely grateful to all of our brilliant teachers, heads, partners throughout the system, and everyone who's worked to make the progress that has been achieved so far, with, I am confident, a great deal more to come.
Yeah. Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I believe this isn't just an education crisis, it's a health crisis, and it's actually a crisis of equality as well. The numbers of children who are not getting the education they are entitled to, as we've heard, has hugely increased in recent years for a variety of reasons. So it's no surprise that the figures that my party produced show over the autumn and spring terms, over 1.5 million children were persistently absent from both primary and secondary school, more than double the number of 5 years ago. This is a huge number of children who are being let down, whose entire lives will be affected. It will impact on the opportunities they may have, never mind the education they are losing. This is a crisis that, if we're not careful, could see an entire generation written off, yet the figures continue to rise and the system seems unable to cope. In my local authority area, Cheshire West, absence rates for pupils have roughly doubled in the last 3 years, leading to the crisis point we've reached today. There are a number of reasons for this, with a huge increase, but undoubtedly a major factor from
what I'm seeing is how we're dealing with children with special educational needs. The number of pupils with an EHC plan in Cheshire West has risen by nearly 50% in 3 years, and that's before we talk about all those children who've yet to actually get an EHCP. And if I recount the stories of some of my constituents, we can see how this is becoming an issue and how depressingly familiar a pattern is forming. The child is struggling at school. There's often an undiagnosed medical issue. It could be the people needs an EHCP. They might need a referral to CAMS instead. Neither of those are easy to get, and all the while the situation at school is deteriorating. Eventually the schools say they can't deal with the child anymore, or the child can't cope with school, relationships break down, education grinds to a halt, and far too often in those situations the feeling that parents get is that they are on their own. When I hear from these children's parents, I know they just want to do what is best for their children, but they do feel that they're on their own. They're often exhausted, they're always frustrated, and they feel they have to battle the whole time, the school, the NHS, the system, just to get the education that they should have as a right for their children. One parent told me, and I'll quote her because I think it's worth listening to, there needs to be more pastoral and mental health support within schools. This government needs to understand that a one-size curriculum does not fit all. Children's mental health services are so overstretched and under-resourced that young people are on waiting lists for months on end and no support while they wait. All of the above have contributed to my girls having lots of absences, lots of letters home with threats of further action, not only cause distress to young people, but also to the parents. Yeah. So I attended the National Autistic Society event this morning on education, and a very useful phrase was used at it, collaboration, not confrontation. And I think that should be a useful guide for us moving forward. The same event revealed a survey said that 3/4 of parents of autistic children don't think their children's school meets their needs, and shockingly only 39% of teachers had received more than half a day's autism training. I think those figures tell us an awful lot about where we could put some things right. And whether it's an autism assessment or support for a mental health condition, my constituents are often waiting a year or even more just to get that assessment. And a year is such a long time in a young person's life. And waits of that length or even longer don't help the children who are obviously suffering with a whole range of issues. They may have anxiety and depression to the extent that they're not able to attend school. They may be self-harming and they're just having to wait to get that assessment because their cases are supposedly not serious enough. You do have to wonder what kind of system thinks that a year out of a child's life, when every year, every day counts in terms of their education, is not worthy of more priority. Finally, I just want to say a little word about the Children and Families Act, because if a child with special educational needs has a named school on their EHCP, then that school must admit the child regardless of whether there are places available. That is the law, but that doesn't seem to be happening in practice. After the battle the parent has tried to get the EHCP in the first place, going on for months if not years, the battle then is still sadly not over. We're now seeing a trend where parents are finding at the consultation stage that schools or potential schools are being identified, but they're actually refusing to take the pupils. So we're getting more and more examples of children becoming education orphans because no school will take them. Often their conditions are too complex for a mainstream school, but all the specialist schools are full. We know the 14-year-old has been out of education now for 3 months because all the specialist provision in the area is full. We're helping a 6-year-old with an EHC at a mainstream school at present, but they can't support him. Consultations are ongoing with 3 other schools, but 2 of them have refused to take him so far. The question for him is when will he get that education? And the question for so many other parents around the country is when will their children get the education that they deserve?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Education is key to young people having access to skills and opportunities in the future, and so we're right to be concerned about issues with attendance. In the spring of last year, there were nearly 1.5 million children persistently absent from school. That means that nearly 1 in 5 of our children were missing 10% or more of their school time, the equivalent to an afternoon or more every week. And the sudden surge in persistent absence and severe absence risks a profound impact on educational attainment and longer-term outcomes. This is why, before Christmas, I tabled a new bill in Parliament to tackle this issue and will be leading a debate in Westminster Hall in just a very short period of time. I believe we should be very proud of our nation's young people. We should be proud that children in England now rank 11th in the world for maths, 13th for reading. Back in 2010, when today's school leavers were just starting out in reception, the same league tables placed those same cohorts of children at 27th for maths and 25th for reading. There's been phenomenal progress, and we must not let it slip. The reasons for increased levels of pupils' absence are often multiple and complex. They include issues such as support for those with special educational needs and disabilities, anxiety and mental health. We know, for example, that if a child's SEND needs are unmet, this can lead them to missing out on education. Changes in attitudes towards minor ailments may be another driving force behind school absences. And there may be other changing societal issues. For example, it's been suggested to me that increasingly more addictive online gaming is impacting negatively on mental health and resulting in more children and young people missing school. I'd like to see more research on that. For the most vulnerable pupils, regular attendance is also an important protective factor. Absence from school can expose young people to other harms, such as being drawn into crime or serious violence. In addressing the issue of school attendance, it's important we don't simply lay the blame at the door on hard-working parents. Most parents want their children to do well, but many need help to support their children to fulfil this aspiration. Securing attendance requires a holistic approach, bringing together schools, families, the local authority and other local partners. Much detailed work has already been undertaken on this issue. In 2002, as the Minister said, following a detailed consultation, the Department for Education published the new guidance entitled Working Together to Improve School Attendance. It's over 60 pages long, extremely detailed, and a lot of emphasis is put on early help and multidisciplinary support. Last year, the Education Select Committee did a detailed inquiry on the issue of attendances. Witnesses agreed that this guidance needed to be put on a statutory footing, and this was a major recommendation of the committee. Making it mandatory to follow best practice is supported by the Children's Commissioner and the Centre for Justice as social justice, as well as the Select Committee. So before Christmas, I tabled a private member's bill to make this happen. The bill will make the guidance statutory so that all schools, trusts, local authorities and other relevant local partners need to follow it. It will introduce a new general duty on local authorities to use their functions to promote regular attendance and reduce absence, and it will require schools of all types to have and publicise a school attendance policy. The DfE has said it will publish a revised version of the guidance ahead of these new provisions coming forward. Now, I note that the Shadow Minister has called for the introduction of I note that the Shadow Minister, who isn't listening, has called for the introduction of a register of children who are out of school due to elective home education. I fully agree with her that improving the data and visibility of these children so that councils can verify that the children are receiving a suitable education in a safe environment would be a good step forward. This is also supported by the Local Government Association. It is not part of my bill, but it is part of a separate bill which was also tabled before Christmas by my honourable friend Phillipson Drummond, the MP for Meon Valley, a former Ofsted inspector herself. In order for the Shadow Minister to get what she wants, all she needs to do is support the private member's bill. And if she really wanted it so much, why didn't she ask any of the Labour members who topped the private bills ballot, who came in first place, second, fourth and fifth in that ballot, to table that bill? It would then have got through the House last Friday and already be in committee. My bill is scheduled to have its second reading on February the 2nd. I hope that the school attendance bill will get cross-party support from MPs, including the Shadow Minister opposite, so it can move forward swiftly.
Mr Deputy Speaker, firstly, may I extend my deepest sympathies to the family of Sir Tony Lloyd. I would also like to mention, as members will know, that I'm a proud Somerset councillor. Tory cuts to local authorities have had far-reaching consequences, and in Somerset this has been mixed with toxic cocktail of the previous Tory administration's financial ineptitude. This perfect storm has vastly increased the burden on local authorities to deliver high-quality statutory frontline services which residents should expect. Particular pressure is on education. In 2022, at the autumn term of, Somerset State Schools had a primary school absence rate of 5.3%, including 3.2% due to illness. At secondary level, there was a 10.2% absence rate, including 4.9% due to illness. These statistics don't reflect what illness is, acute or chronic, COVID-related or not. That reflects a wider problem. We're treating children with SEND as a homogenous identity. I fully support a children not in school register, which reflects this data, as the Honourable Member for Houghton and Sunderland South proposes. One of my constituents is a 13-year-old Otis. He has a diagnosis of autism and Tourette's syndrome. Now, Otis first attended a mainstream school, but his parents told me, despite the school's best efforts, this just didn't work out for him. Otis then moved to a special school, the Mendip in Priestley, but this didn't work either, despite the school doing everything that they could. Now, let me again quote Otis's parents. Otis felt that he was placed with pupils with much more significant and more visible needs. His education offer was gradually whittled until he did not go to the school site at all. If Otis can take up a rare special school place in September, he will have been out of school for 2.5 years. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, this trend is clear. Pupils with SEND start school school absence and then are either officially or effectively suspended or excluded. Mine's 2021 report, Making the Grade, showed that 68% of the interviewed pupils had at least one absence due to mental health. We need top-down direction from the department that ensures schools don't unfairly penalise pupils with SEND for low attendance. That includes children with possible mental health issues who haven't received a diagnosis because of the NHS backlog this government has caused. We simply can't view all children with SEND as a conglomerate in the same way that we wouldn't group numeracy and literacy statistics together. Child A, who is non-verbal with autism, might be absent because she needs to be in a sensory tent without disruption. Child B, with ME, might be absent because he isn't physically able to get out of bed. Child C, in a wheelchair with muscular dystrophy, might be absent because a staff member who helps them with sanitary needs is off that day. Meanwhile, childs D, E and F are almost invisible from the system because they're on a 2-year waiting list for diagnosis, because they're the sibling of a seriously ill child going without sleep, or because they tell their teacher they just had the flu to avoid questions about their mental health. Now, I know all 6 of these children, and I suspect many colleagues know children just like them too. We need the government to recognise key differences with the SEND acronym, to set up a national SEND body, to have a comprehensive training for all civil servants, ministers, council and school staff, to have a mental health practitioner in every school, to ring-fence funding for local authorities to have schools cost of an EHCP, and to reform the Mental Health Act. And we need a children not in school register which is sensitive and informed. These policies will help to ensure children are not alienated from their peers or shut out of education. We Liberal Democrats have committed to all of these things. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, when we really understand the reasons why so many children are absent, we can deliver effective and tailored solutions to level up our stratified society and give all our children grade 9 education.
Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And as the Minister stated, this motion conflates 2 very important but distinct issues. Absent and not in school sound similar, but if the Shadow Minister thinks that the issues around absence is all about children being home educated, which is what my bill's about, she has failed to grasp the issue. Both are important and both need to be addressed, but this motion fails to do so. My honourable friend for Chelmsford is putting forward a bill to address school attendance, particularly with persistent absence. And I'm putting forward a bill to address the register of children not in school for home-educated children, which is much more long-term. So I'd like to address why I'm going to put this bill forward. The only thing I would agree with the Honourable Lady is that currently no one, neither government nor local authorities nor schools, can honestly answer the question how many children are missing from school. Therefore, how can we know that every child is safe and suitably educated? Equally concerningly is the number of children who've disappeared from the school roll altogether. While we do not have the data to fully understand where these children are, it's thought that many may have moved into home education. Now, I want to take this opportunity to make it absolutely clear. I fully believe that parents have the right to choose what education their children receive. This right should be enshrined in law. Parents are in the best place to make informed choices about what their child needs, with many parents providing a high-quality home education for their child. However, this is not the case for every child in home education, with a worrying number being taken off roll for reasons other than their best interest, and where parents have not been able to make a fair and free choice. Research by the Centre for Social Justice has uncovered a growing number of parents opting for home education because they feel that they have no option due to their child's needs not being met in school. This could be a result of difficulties accessing SEND provision, and many autistic children are in this category. A lack of support for mental health, unresolved bullying issues or health concerns following the pandemic. Most troubling is the evidence that shows that some people have felt coerced into home education for reasons other than the child's best interest through the scourge that's called off-rolling. I'd like to take a moment here to pay tribute to the many parents who are doing an admirable job, including my niece, providing their children with a high-quality home education. However, this is simply not reality for every child. With no comprehensive data collected, we do not know what proportion of children receive a suitable education, and England is an international outlier in this respect. A number of organisations, including Ofsted, the Children's Commissioner and the Centre for Social Justice, have uncovered worrying reports of home-educated pupils being left without access to an appropriate quality of education. One of my constituents wrote to me and said that he'd been in that category. And parents are left struggling to cope with the demands of home education. As the number of home-educated children increase, so should our drive to ensure that parents are able to exercise their right to choose how best to educate their child, and that every child is supported to achieve the best educational outcomes possible. Implementing a children not in school register is the natural first step to achieving this. A register would not seek to disrupt a parental right to choose where and when they educate their child. Quite the contrary, as a register can be used to offer resources to families who are often home educated at great personal cost should they want such support. The register would allow us to find and support those children and families who've been left on the fringes of the education system and who may be at risk of harm. It is time to bring these children who are out of sight and out of mind back into the light. Education is key to the country's continued prosperity and must make the focus of must remain the focus of any government. I would like to thank the government for their interest in my bill and the opposition who appear to be interested as well. And I look forward to continuing my work with them as it proceeds through both houses. I would ask the opposition to stop playing party politics with such an important issue, and I hope that all sides of the House will back my bill to introduce a register of children not in school, which is so important for ensuring the welfare and education of every single child.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it's good to follow the Honourable Lady, and I commend her efforts in bringing forward a private member's bill on this very important subject. I'm a bit confused, though, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because, if we all agree this is really important, why doesn't the government just vote for our motion? Yeah. I thought that my friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, showed very neatly exactly who it is putting party politics above our kids this afternoon. And it is not members on this side, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Even better, if the government are so in favour of this, why don't they bring forward a legislative measure in their own time? The government are the ones who dictate the timetable of this place pretty much all the time. So if they're so concerned about our children, then surely it wouldn't be left to the opposition to put this forward. as my friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, made her case so well. Underneath this issue is, I think, as many people would accept, that the partnership between parents and school just now is pretty much broken, that the team that our kids need to support them, their parents, their wider family, their teachers, are all struggling and finding life very hard. And I want to make 3 very brief points, Mr Deputy Speaker, as to how we can put that partnership right, how we can all do some very simple things to help our children have a better chance at school, particularly reflecting on my own experience in the Wirral. Number 1, breakfast clubs. Yeah. Breakfast clubs are incredibly important to give children the best start to the day, but they're also very good for parents, particularly those who are under pressure to get a decent job so that they can afford the dreadful cost of living rises that we've had recently. If your school's got a breakfast club, that means that the parents there have got the choice of a job that starts at 9 o'clock. And that can make all the difference in the world to a family, particularly encouraging mums as well as dads to have a job. Where you've got a second earner in a home, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's incredibly good for tackling poverty. And so Labour's policy to get breakfast clubs in every school is not just making sure that our children have an excellent start in every primary school. It is making sure that our children have a great start to the day, but also giving their parents the choice of jobs. Yeah. Point number 2, mental health support inside and outside schools. Now, a couple of members have mentioned this already, and I've witnessed for myself what's happening to our children in the Wirral, particularly where families are affected by disability or special educational needs, as the case was just made excellently previously. The current system for SEND is broken. We don't know nearly enough about how to support children, and the problems that we're having in the Wirral are being exacerbated by a lack of educational psychologists. In the end, though, the way to tackle this is to make sure that every child has got access to good mental health support. Put in that base level of professionals in every school, and that will help children have support earlier in their school journey and prevent those mental health problems being exacerbated. And I really think that strengthening that mental health workforce in schools should be our first response to make sure that their problems don't get worse, because we know that a lot of mental health problems really do start in those early teenage years. Yeah. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, when I think about the biggest thing that we could do to help rebuild the relationships between families and schools, to make sure that everybody is really giving our kids the best start in life, I think one of the most important things is excellent English and maths teaching, of course, and a broader curriculum. Yeah. Because there is no doubt in my mind that when I see schools in the Wirral having fantastic sports teams, having great active schools where children get the opportunity to perform on stage, to tell a story about who they are and what they care about through the performing arts, there's no doubt that those children, Mr Deputy Speaker, are much happier in school. It helps build the school community. And I'm glad the Secretary of State seems to be agreeing with me from a sedentary position, Mr Deputy Speaker. My only regret is that the past 14 years have done very little to help support that vision.
Double. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to make a contribution to this debate, because the subject of school absence and levels of school attendance is a particular challenge that we are facing at the moment in Cornwall, where rates of school absence are significantly higher than the national average. We are seeing around 8.5% level of absence in recent years, when the national average is about 7.4%. And whereas nationally, as we've heard, is about 24% of pupils are persistently absent, in Cornwall that figure is almost 35%. Now, I think there are some particular reasons why we are seeing that in Cornwall. We've seen a large number of people actually move to Cornwall in recent times. certainly since the pandemic, and many of them have coming because of the lifestyle that Cornwall has to offer and the choices that are available for them when they move to Cornwall. But I also have a number of concerns around the way that this situation that we currently face is being handled. For many years, I have been very concerned at what I see as the state encroaching on the role of parents, and that seems to be happening more and more. That's something that I was concerned about long before I became to this House, and it doesn't seem to be stopping. And I believe very firmly that the primary responsibility for the welfare and raising of children has to lie with parents, and although the state can support parents and help parents in that role, it should not seek to take over that role. And I was very pleased to hear the Minister at the dispatch box confirm that the government's position is that it will always support the right of parents who wish to home educate their children to do so. And I think that is absolutely the right position to take. Many parents choose for very positive reasons to home educate their children. And I have to say that some of the most mature, articulate, intelligent and well-rounded children I have ever met in my life have been home educated. But as has already been pointed out in this debate, regrettably, many parents now find themselves having to home educate their children, not because that's what they believe is right for their for their children, but because they feel forced into that situation because they can't find the right school environment and support available for their children who may have particular challenges, whether that is autism or perhaps a mental health condition. And if I can just touch on one particular issue in the time I've got left that I think is driving this issue, and that is the attendance targets and the overbearing and heavy-handed approach that many schools are taking to attendance targets that is leaving no flexibility for children who are facing particular challenges, and parents are being threatened with fines for not bringing their children to school. I have had one parent even come to me and show letters from their GP saying that their child was suffering with a mental health challenge and therefore would not be able to attend school regularly, but the school still fined the parent for that child not being in school regularly. And I just find that this whole drive that seems to be that reaching an attendance target is the only thing that matters, with no flexibility or no particular allowance made for the very particular condition or circumstances that a family or a child find themselves in, is actually creating tension and breaking down the relationship between the school and the parents at the very time that those parents need support from the school. And so I would just ask the Minister if we could look at this situation. I know the official position of the government is that head teachers have discretion and flexibility, but I'm afraid that message hasn't got through to Ofsted, who I am told regularly still mark down schools who fail to reach the 95% attendance target, even when the head teacher can demonstrate there are very sensible reasons why certain children have not been able to attend school. And this threat of fines, I know the Minister knows from his previous time in the department, I've never agreed with fining parents for children missing school. I believe it is a very unconservative thing to do. But at least let's take away that threat of fining parents when there are very legitimate reasons why their child has not been able to attend school. Because I could give you a long list. My office are contacted almost every week now by parents who are withdrawing their children from school because they want to avoid the fine of their children not being able to attend school regularly, even when there are very good reasons why their child can't attend school. I haven't got any more time, but I would just ask the Minister, please look at this situation and the way that these targets are driving what I believe is counterproductive behaviour from schools. Not the teachers' fault. I think it's coming from policy and Ofsted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I think we all agree in this House on the value of education and how it can enrich the lives of children and give them the best start in life possible. And I'm proud that improvements and development of education has been the legacy of every Labour government to date. And therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, it pains me that I'm yet again rising to talk about an issue for which the government has overseen almost a decade and a half of managed decline. The numbers are terrifying. Between 2016 and 2022, school absences trebled. If trends continue, then 200,000 children will miss half of their school time by 2026. And, Mr Speaker, the issue of school absences are a threat to the education that is so vital in setting our children up for life, to giving them the best start possible. But it's not an issue in isolation. Yes, school absences are a cause of increased barriers to opportunity, but they're also a symptom of wider issues. In rural areas like my constituency, school absences are only exacerbated by inadequate public transport and sparse special needs education. And as honourable members have mentioned, there are a multitude of reasons that children are not in school, not just because they're home educated, but that they're being affected by parental imprisonment, they're young carers, they have disabilities. We need a register that also captures the barriers that children face. Otherwise, we have no hope of breaking those barriers down. I talked about inadequate public transport. Skelmersdale, in my constituency, as anyone that's heard me speak in this chamber will know, has got 40,000 people and no train station. It's also got a woefully inadequate bus service. My constituents have reported issues with reliability and frequency. But we can remove the barriers that make getting to school more difficult for those in rural communities if we focus on what really matters to them. Similarly, children with special educational needs must be able to get the support they need. One of my constituents, Mr Deputy Speaker, whose child has not been in school for almost 6 months, told me that the school identified by the local authority told them that their child was, and I quote, unsuitable for their school. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are no unsuitable children, only underfunded, overstretched schools. The government recognised the omissions of their strategy for SEND when, in March 2023, they offered their SEND and Alternative Provision Improvement Plan. However, the plan did not address how rural SEND pupils may risk falling through the net, or how failures in provision may be contributing to school absenteeism. For pupils with special educational needs but without an education, health and care plan, and who are in mainstream schools, the school are generally expected to use their delegated funding to meet their students' needs. If schools are unable to meet those needs within their budgets, or if pupils can't be swiftly assessed and provided with an AHCP, we risk these students being absent from the education they need and deserve through no fault of their own or their parents. I have been contacted by numerous parents in my constituency who essentially keep children from school, fearful because the school cannot meet their child's needs, and in true belief that it is more harmful for their child to be in school than not. Improving school attendance and reducing absenteeism requires a holistic assessment of the barriers children face. It requires timely medical care, shorter waiting lists when our children get sick, improvements to public transport, and better SEND services to ensure children's needs are being met. How many children are not regularly attending school and therefore listed in school absence figures because SEND provision is stretched and mainstream schooling not meeting their needs? People in rural communities like mine understand that some children are missing school not through their own fault or their own choice, but because they simply can't get there, or if they can, the school doesn't provide their needs. Labour's plan to address the issues of absences is simple. Roll out breakfast clubs, put mental health support into schools, make sure that SEND provision is joined up and adequate. Children under Labour will have a change to the school system to nurture an environment and provide schools they can access and thrive in.
Order. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. By the time parents come to see me in the surgery about their children not attending school, it's clear the system has already failed them. I've had parents come and see me in tears, talking about their children as school refusers, telling me about the difficulty they have trying to get them out of the door, how the children sometimes can become aggressive towards the parent trying to take them, hysterical, threatening self-harm, all because, for whatever reason, that person simply doesn't wish to attend school. It can be because of anxiety, it can be because of mental health, The overwhelming anxiety, children feeling sick in the morning before they're going to school, parents telling me children are developing rashes related to anxiety because they don't want to go to school. It can be because of bullying, with the added element, of course, of the cyberbullying. I've had parents come and see me telling me that the young person has been encouraged to take a photograph of themselves. That photograph is sent to the boyfriend at the time, only then to go viral around the school. And that young person to feel ashamed and humiliated, unable to go to school, and in some cases not even feeling able to leave their own house. It can be because of a diagnosed special need, which has been mentioned across the House. The fact they're waiting those 2 years for the EHCP that they see as their golden ticket to finally getting the help that their child actually needs. And what happens when these children are refusing to go and the parents, good parents, are trying and unable to make them? Well, the local authority has limited powers to intervene. As has already been mentioned by the honourable gentleman opposite, the school's answer at times can be to threaten to fine the parent who is trying to do the best by their child. The local authority cannot insist on managed moves. It can only try and encourage schools to support them, but it doesn't have the power. Up and down the country, there's the lack of specialist places, and local authorities, of course, are unable to open their own special schools. They have to do it through the 3-school system, so they cannot manage adequately the own demand in their area. And their spending on their high needs block, as many people will tell you who work in local authorities, is way beyond the actual budget that they've been given. So what would any of us do? What would any of us do if our child was refusing to go to school, becoming hysterical, threatening self-harm, clearly suffering with anxiety, the school is threatening to fine us, there's nowhere else for the child to go? Well, I can clearly see why parents at that point say, this is enough, I'm withdrawing my child from the system. And I've spoken to many parents who have made that decision. And what can happen next, of course, varies upon the child and upon the parents involved. In some cases, it can be the best thing that happens to that child. They can regain their self-confidence, their self-esteem, they can start to mix again, and then often has a happy ending. They go to the 14 to 16 college, which is a completely different environment to the school. They go on and thrive. But that's clearly not the case for all children. Some children drop out of education, never to return to education, never getting the qualifications that they adequately need, and some children, unfortunately, are incredibly vulnerable then to exploitation and abuse. So what's the answer? Well, the answer, of course, must always start with the early years. The answer must start with communication skills. One of the first things I did when becoming a Member of Parliament was set up the all-party parliamentary group for oracy. And I think having young people, equipping them with the ability to communicate and express how they feel is crucial, especially when we think about those young children so upset and so frustrated not wanting to go to school. Given the right tools to express themselves, that can open it. Health visitors, something else that the Labour Party is promising. Health visitors to support children before they go to school. Early years education, support, getting them prepared for that time when they go to school so they know what to expect. And crucially and importantly, and I'm so proud our party is supporting this, mental health workers in every school, mental health professionals. Teachers are not mental health professionals. Mr Deputy Speaker, when I was a teacher, I wasn't a mental health professional. Professionals are needed in school to support children. You cannot put that onto the teachers. And has been mentioned as well, a curriculum review. To have a curriculum that equips the children for now, equips them for the future, but also, dare I say it, Mr Deputy Speaker, makes school fun and actually makes the children want to go. And finally, the breakfast clubs to help and encourage children to attend school. I visited Christopher Pickering School in my constituency last week, and they were telling me about the breakfast club they offer, but for a limited number of pupils. Kids were telling me it was great. They were telling me that they do Just Dance. I was luckily unable to join in on that. Just Dance and dodgeball. They play with their friends and they start the day happy. Now, with a Labour government, that opportunity would be offered to every single child, and that can't come soon enough.
Catherine McKinnell, Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Across this House, I'm sure we can all agree that one of the most important things we can provide our children is with a high-quality education, an education that inspires them to learn, that helps them to discover their interests and passions, and that sets them up for life. But if children aren't in school every day, they cannot access the opportunities they need. Schools shouldn't be seen as an optional activity, something to be dipped in and out of. Research from the Centre for Social Justice, however, has found that more than 1 in 4 parents think that school isn't essential every day. Not just 1 in 4 adults, 1 in 4 parents. It signifies a real breakdown in the relationship between schools, family and government. Because what example are we setting as a country if such a high proportion of parents aren't prioritising getting their children to school every day? Every child matters, and to those children, every day at school matters. But for years, this persistent absence problem has got worse under this government's watch. Last year, 21.2% of children were persistently absent from school, over 1 in 5, double the rate from just 6 years ago. In my local authority of Newcastle upon Tyne, the number of children missing half of their lessons rocketed by 282% between 2016 and 2022. The Secretary of State said that keeping children in school was her, and I quote, #1 policy, priority. But absence rates have been rocketing for years, and we have seen too little action. It's only become a priority because the Labour Party have consistently spoken about this issue. And now, because of the Tories' inaction, the situation is spiralling out of control. Yet they still don't have a long-term plan. The problem does not exist in isolation. Our children are facing a mental health crisis. Record numbers are living in poverty, and they're being taught in schools that one teacher recently described to me as joyless. A lost generation missing from Britain's schools is what is at stake here. Yet, where is the government's plan to deal with it? The Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port and Neston spoke powerfully about the impact on families in his area, particularly families with children with special educational needs. The Honourable Member for Wirral South made a very powerful case for why the government should back Labour's motion today. The Honourable Member for West Lancashire rightly identified that we need to break down the barriers to opportunity, and that means breaking down the barriers to attending school, as did the Honourable Member for Hull, West and Hessle. That's why, unlike the Tories, Labour will work in government to break down those barriers to opportunity. We will get our children back into the classroom, and we have outlined a plan, if we are in government, that will address it. We recognise that not every child learns in school, and we support every parent to make that choice about whether they send their child to school or they home educate. But to make sure that no child falls through the gap, we need a proper record of where our children are being educated. This shouldn't be controversial. The Conservatives even proposed a register of children not in school before shelving it when education was no longer a priority for them. The Honourable Member for Meon has campaigned on this issue. The Honourable Member for Chelmsford spoke very powerfully about her campaign on school attendance. But it's quite frankly shameful that these matters that even Conservative backbenchers are raising and lobbying their own government on are going to have to wait for a Labour government to fix them. Because we would get on with the job and we would introduce a register, allowing councils to request information on home education and the ability to visit premises. It's part of our plan to deliver high and rising standards for our next generation. Yes, I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
For giving way. The Honourable Lady makes some great points. The problem with this motion is it talks about persistent school absence. Persistent school absence is actually on the school roll already, and schools are able to track those that are on school. The register of not in school children is purely for home educated children that are not on a school register, where the persistent absences children are.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of clarification, but we're not unclear about this. We don't disagree on the need both to tackle persistent absence and to start with a register that identifies where children are being educated. It's something the government has pledged to do, and The Honourable Lady would be minded to continue putting pressure on the government that has the power to do something about it right now, or Labour will do it in government. We will also roll out free breakfast clubs in every primary school. Evidence shows that they improve children's learning and development. They have a positive impact on attendance and behaviour. We will fully fund them by ending the non-dom tax breaks for the mega-rich. It's as much about the club as it is about the breakfast, providing children a softer start to the school day with opportunities to play and socialise with their friends, setting them up well to learn throughout the day. Maybe in his remarks, the Minister can support Labour's call for free breakfast clubs in every primary school, rather than the fraction that their programme is reaching. Labour is also committed to addressing the mental health crisis that our children are facing, a key barrier to learning, and yet children remain on long CAMS waiting lists, unable to access the support they need. So we would recruit thousands of new staff to bring down these waiting lists and put specialist mental health professionals in schools and in community hubs so children can get the help they need, solving problems before they get worse. We would tackle this issue head on, not let it spiral further out of control. And we also need to see accountability in our system. So Labour's plan will involve annual school checks, which cover persistent absence, off-rolling and child safeguarding. So problems are picked up early on, not left until the next inspection, like in Wales, where Neston have strengthened their reporting requirements on attendance and where all schools are now required to make available their attendance policies. And we would reset the relationship that has weakened confidence in our inspection system by reforming the one-word headline grade with a report card, identifying areas that schools need to improve and delivering the support to do so through new regional improvement teams. And to show him, I will give way.
Very grateful. Does she support making schools responsible for children that they exclude?
The honourable gentleman will know that this matter is part of a school accountability system that is under his government system, and obviously we will undertake a full review of our approach in terms of Ofsted and will include many issues that this government is currently failing on that the Labour government will address. And to ensure this high quality education in our schools, we must ensure our children are learning a curriculum that best sets them up for life. The pandemic really shone a light on how children's early speech and language development was affected, and we know that stronger early communication skills boost outcomes and provide better engagement with school. So we would prioritise equipping primary schools with funding to deliver early evidence-based language interventions. And when it comes to the curriculum, more broadly, we know it needs reform. It's far too narrow and it's putting children off learning. The life satisfaction scores of UK students have fallen through the floor in recent years. The UK now has the second lowest average life satisfaction of 15-year-olds in the OECD. We see the opportunities for music, art, sport and drama often squeezed, opportunities for discussion and debate few and far between. So our curriculum and assessment review would look at delivering a broad curriculum that prepares children for the future, reflecting the issues and diversity in our society, assessments that capture the full strength of every child, giving them an excellent foundation in reading, writing and maths, without sacrificing the things that make school fun. So to conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, the difference Labour will bring is clear. Under the Tories, we've had 14 years of decline, school standards slipping, teachers leaving in droves, education not even getting a seat at the table, whereas Labour will do what we did in 1997, bring education back to the centre of national life again, with a focus on putting children first, ensuring excellence is for everyone. And I commend this motion to the House.
David Johnston.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. This government is committed to giving every child in this country a first-class education and every opportunity to make the most of their abilities. While there are a small number of children who, for good reasons, need to be educated elsewhere, we want all children to be at school every day. This is key for their life chances. For children who are home educated, or right parents have, and we don't question, most do a very good job, it is vital we know the education they're providing is suitable and that the children are safe. As my right honourable friend the Schools Minister said, this motion conflates two separate things. The issue of persistent absence, which is where pupils miss 10% or more of their lessons, and the topic of home education for those who are not in school. To take persistent absence first. The year the government came to power, persistent absence was at 16.3%. We got this down to 10.5% in 2015-16, and it averaged 10.9% in the 5 years prior to the pandemic. It was then during the pandemic that this rose significantly again to 22.5%. The government is taking wide-ranging action to tackle this. We had already established 14 attendance hubs across 800 schools that are reaching 400,000 pupils. This term, we're more than doubling the number of hubs so that nearly 2,000 schools will be supported by these. We're rolling out an attendance mentor pilot that we had in 5 areas to a further 10 areas, and this programme will reach around 10,000 children. We've deployed 10 expert attendance advisors to support local authorities and school trusts. We have developed a data tool which is helping schools understand the local trends and target their support, strengthened our guidance to local authorities, and for the first time, schools are expected to have a member of the senior leadership team who is responsible for attendance. Evidence suggests this strategy is working. There were 380,000 fewer persistently absent pupils in the last academic year, and in the last academic term, overall absence was down to 6.8% from 7.5% in the autumn term the year before. This is all backed by a national communications campaign to remind parents that moments matter and attendance counts. This campaign aims to encourage parents to realise their child should attend school if they have a mild cough or cold and no fever or vomiting, and that mild anxiety can be made worse by a prolonged period of absence. This campaign has been running across social media and radio, and we're also grateful to Sir Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, for his letter reassuring school leaders that children should generally attend school if they have mild respiratory illnesses because it's good for their well-being and a host of other things. Of course, mental health challenges do underpin some of the absence, something raised by a member for Kingston upon Hull West and Hessle, among others. That's why we've been rolling out mental health support teams, which now cover 44% of pupils in schools and colleges and will cover 50% of those pupils by March 2025. We're also offering all state schools and colleges a grant to train a senior mental health lead, and we're pleased that 14,400 schools and colleges have already taken this up, covering 7 in 10 of all state secondary schools. There is then the related but separate issue of a register for those being home educated. And I should say, declare that I was on the Education Committee when my right honourable friend, the member for Harlow, was chairing it, and we produced a report recommending a register for those not in school. That remains a recommendation of the Education Committee. It's that register that was in the schools bill that was referred to in the motion, and which we remain committed to legislating for. My honourable friend, the member for Meon Valley, has been doing great work to champion this issue, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of the second reading of her bill on the 15th of March. Now, various points were raised in this debate, which I will try and cover as many of as possible. The members for Ellesmere, Port and Neston, Somerton and Frome and West Lancashire raised issues about the SEND system. Our SEND and AP reform plan is designed to address the issues that they raised about children being in suitable provision and in a timely manner. We shouldn't have children out of school for a prolonged period of time because they're unable to get their needs met. My honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, I think currently doing her Westminster Hall debate, has an important bill on attendance, and I look forward to seeing the progress of that through the House. The member for Wirral South raised the topic of breakfast clubs, and we are funding breakfast clubs in 2,700 schools. Many schools already had a breakfast club, of course, and have had for some time. But we are funding 2,700. And then my honourable friend, the member for St Austell and Newquay, raised the issue of fixed penalty notices. Our guidance is clear that it should be a support-first approach, but penalties are to prevent court action taking place. I should say 89% of the fixed penalty notices that are issued are for unauthorised term time holidays, but I'm happy to pick that discussion up with him. My final point, Mr Deputy Speaker, is this. I have watched the Labour Party try to reinvent itself as the champion of children being in school. And many of them have raised issues of the pandemic, which is where a lot of these problems stem from. I remember, however, their actions during that pandemic. I remember how long it took them to say that schools were safe. I remember the then Prime Minister standing here every week asking the Leader of the Opposition to say that schools were safe and him not doing so. I remember that one of their union allies produced a statement saying that teachers should not be teaching a full timetable nor routinely marking work during this period. They said nothing to challenge them. When that same union teamed up with other unions and produced a 200-point list of things it wanted to see before schools returned, the Labour Party said nothing to challenge them. What was Labour's big idea during the pandemic? To go against the vaccination advice of the JCVI, saying we should vaccinate by age and vaccinate teachers, no other profession, teachers, whatever their age. Why? Because the unions wanted that to happen. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, in addition to this motion conflating two separate things, in addition to this problem being worse in Labour-run Wales, like all problems are, we will not allow the Labour Party to reinvent the history of their behaviour under this Leader of the Opposition. They can't blame the last Leader of the Opposition for this. Under this Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, it was this government during the pandemic which did all it could it was this government during the pandemic that did all it could to get children back to school. And it is this government doing all it can to get children back to school now.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no? No! Division, clear the lobbies. Men of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no? No. Tell us for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Christian Wakeford. Tell us for the noes, Mark Jenkinson and Joy Morrissey. Lock the doors.
Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 189. The noes to the left, 303.
The ayes to the right were 189. The noes to the left were 303. So the noes have it. Unlock.